Welcome to YourTown television program. My name is Carol McKibben. I'm the director of the Salinas History Project. And last time we talked a lot about Salinas in the 19th and early 20th century. Today we're going to talk about the present. We're going to talk about Salinas policy and practice on the ground today. So my guests are Megan Hunter, who is the Director of Community Development for Salinas, Cary Siegfried, who is the Director of Library and Community Services in Salinas, and Kirstan Lundquist, who is the Recreation and Community Services Supervisor in Salinas. Superintendent, sorry. Welcome, ladies. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And the reason that I'm glad to have you here is because you are the doers. So when we think about the way a city functions, we normally start with city councils and mayors. And those are the people who present policy to us. We're used to seeing those people on television. What we're not often aware of are the people who make those policies work, who are the implementers of those policies. And certainly in Salinas, there's a new vision to take it forward into the 21st century. We're seeing a lot of evidence of that. What we don't often see is the work that goes into the building blocks of making those new initiatives come to life. And so that's where you come in. You run the city. And we won't say that to anyone. That's between us. We're not going to tell the city manager that you actually run the city, but in fact you do, because you're the ones that make it all happen. So Megan Hunter, as the Director of Community Development, you're really in charge of implementing a lot of the planning policies that are going into making one of the least well-served places in the city a viable and integral part of Salinas. And Cary Siegfried, you're in charge of everything, kind of, you really are. But really your focus is on the community in terms of library services, recreation services, and you too, Kirstan. You're doing things on the ground that are bringing people who we often consider just immigrants or undocumented or marginalized or racially, ethnically segregated, bringing them in, giving them an opportunity to move up the socioeconomic ladder and to be part of what we consider to be the American mainstream. So I want to start with that. And it's not, we were talking earlier, by accident that the Alisal is a place with 60% of its residents unable to speak English fluently, many of whom can't speak or write Spanish fluently either. It's not an accident that this is a population that a third of whom would qualify as being defined as in poverty, whereas only a fifth of Salinas would be described that way. Those practices are with us, that reality is with us because of policies that were put in place in the 20s and 30s. So we all have to live with it now, and we all have to do something about it. And one of the things that is being discussed and implemented in Salinas is the Alisal Vibrancy Plan. So Megan, maybe we can start with you, and you can tell us about what that is and what its goals are. What is the purpose of that?
Yeah, so the purpose is to really look at the Alisal and to make sure that the area has the resources and planning that never really took place, but not for it to be driven by government, but for it to be driven by the population. And I think that's where planning has really shifted. We are just technical experts, but we're not supposed to establish the policies, the objectives, the goals. Those should be coming from the community, and we're just there to guide how those documents need to be written so in the future they can be implemented. So a really big piece of the Alisal Vibrancy Plan is to make sure that we have a community engagement system in place and that we have a steering committee. We will have a steering committee of 20 to 23 predominantly residents, 2/3 will be residents, to really help guide the development of the plan. And in addition to that, we'll have numerous working groups that will look at specific policy issues such as transportation in the LSL and how we really want transportation, for example, to work in the LSL. So we're really excited to use this plan to transform the community in the way that the community wants it to be. And I think by building that foundation, then the implementation is not just government, but the implementation becomes everyone within the
people
community.
Themselves.
Yes, yes.
So the LSL, for the one or two people who don't know about where it is on the east side of Salinas. It grew rather haphazardly in the 30s as a result of the Dust Bowl immigration, people flooding in, looking for a place to live and work that was cheap, and that had no zoning. Luckily, the county didn't zone. The city zones. Counties really let people do what they wanted. So the LSL was a stopping off place for newly arrived poor people who tended to be in the 30s white, but now are predominantly Hispanic. That's the dominant population. And what you're saying then is that the learning curve for government agencies such as yours happened in the wake of the 1960s and 70s efforts to revitalize places like the LSL, but they were so top down that they ran into all kinds of trouble. So you're talking about grassroots efforts that are embraced by the city to create a new space that's integral in the city. What, besides transportation, what specific things are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, looking at some of the deficiencies. Housing is a huge one. We have huge overcrowding in the LSL. We have a lot of code violations because of the haphazard development, and some of the buildings are substandard. They're very old, and again, they weren't necessarily built to last, and so how to figure those things out. The one thing we hope to take advantage of and tap into is we have a very vibrant business and economic development area in the LSL. So how do we, take advantage of that? How do we help businesses improve and grow? Open space, of course, there's not a lot of open space, park space. These are all needs, and I think education is also very important. People are really committed to their families and ways of supporting families through great events, but also making sure that children have the best education possible.
So that's looking at the positives of the place. That's looking at what can be done. It's an entrepreneurial powerhouse.
Yes.
Family oriented. And with a lot of aspiration for education. Cary Ann, could you build on that a little bit? Because you are, and Kirstan also, not working in the LSL, but you're working with people from the LSL.
Absolutely. And we do, a great many of our facilities and services are in the LSL. We have the Cesar Chavez Library that is located there. We have several recreation centers that Kirstan can talk a little bit about what the services are there. But I would say there is a great thirst for education and knowledge and all that can bring from the people who live there. Our branch library that's there is really kind of a centerpiece of the community. It is always, whenever I go there, it is always packed with families using the library together. And so in so many cases, that's kind of the centerpiece of our services. When we put services together, we really want to address the entire family, because the entire family is going to be there. So it gives us great opportunities to address parent and child education at the same time. If we're doing homework help for some school-aged children, that's a great time to be able to engage mom or dad or whoever the caregiver may be in ESL programming, in GED programming, in computer literacy, those types of pursuits that are really going to increase their chances of getting a better education, getting a better job. So it's those types of programs that kind of can address the whole family that we're really working with, both in libraries and in parks and recreation. And our recreation centers really serve as those places where kids can congregate and get the kind of mentoring they need to pursue a good education.
So instead of just complaining about problems, these are important, critical baby steps to solving them. They don't get solved overnight or with one fell swoop of policy decision. But you look at a place like that and you think, okay, what's wrong and what can be fixed and what can be fixed easily? And that is something, there's something to be said for that using what we have to ameliorate lives and drastically improve opportunity. Kirstan, do you want to add something to that about what recreation facilities can do for children who perhaps live in an apartment building and don't have a place to play?
Absolutely. Most of our recreation centers are neighborhood based, and so they really serve as a resource for the entire family. Statistics show that there's a lot of negative things that can occur outside of school hours, and so our recreation centers, with caring and
nurturing,
right, exactly, staff who actually in a number of cases have grown up in the neighborhoods, and so they understand the dynamics of the neighborhood, are there to provide that type of mentoring and to show kids opportunities. We have a really strong Saturday night teen program at 3 of our center, or actually 4 now. We just opened at the Cesar Chavez Library, and that's all about creating new experiences, taking them to, we just recently went to the San Francisco Exploratorium, getting them out of just that neighborhood base to see what else is out there for them.
The world is a big place, and we forget that when people live in poverty. They don't know much more than their 4 walls, perhaps, that it's a debilitating and a situation, and it crosses generations unless there is some kind of intervention. And what you're talking about are big interventions, but they're not well-known interventions. So when we talk about a problem like zoning, which happened not at all for the Alisal in the 20s and 30s. And that means that there are hazardous waste areas, that there are places that are truly dangerous and difficult to live in for a number of reasons, that suffer. I know you're from Flint, Michigan, so clean water is a big issue in places like that. And so when we're talking about these big problems, we think we need to wave a magic wand, and that's not how it works. What you're saying is that there are incremental solutions that need to be applied to them. So when we look at the Alisal Vibrancy Plan, I was struck by the multiple levels, and this is all sort of part of the same issue. That it addresses. So it does address transportation. So can you say a quick word about transportation to us? What are you doing about transportation systems in Salinas? What is the issue? What is the difficulty? Are there efforts put in place to bring people in, perhaps who don't have cars?
Yeah, I think if you look at the Alisal, there's a lot of people who don't have cars, who are dependent. There's a lot of walking, there's a lot of biking, but the infrastructure that exists there is mainly for the car.
So bike lanes.
Yeah, so we're very much excited about, we have a grant that we're able to combine with the Vibrancy Plan and really do this kind of deep community engagement to create a corridor along the Alisal that really represents the multiple users of that system. And yes, it includes cars, but we have to look at pedestrians and bikers. And there's also crazy things where you have a lot of families and a lot of women pushing baby carriages, and then all of a sudden the sidewalk disappears, and they're having to
and
go
they're doing in the
road.
street,
yeah. So those are the things that are very critical. Public transportation, bus services, not necessarily the best, and how can we work with the MST to improve services in an area that's highly dependent on public transportation. So those are the things that we plan to have real actionable steps to improve it. And the good news is we're already starting to think about these things. So we have a little bit of money to do these incremental things, but
think of that.
Yeah, but also I think things like safe routes to schools, even just having parents kind of watch kids as they walk to school and make sure that they're safe. These are little things that the community themselves can do to help improve overall for the broader community. It doesn't have to be a big government intervention. So.
Well, and you're also, by doing this, correcting some of the wrongs of the earlier era that were top-down, were sweeping, were magic wand-ish. That if we just do this one thing, it's going to be fixed. Well, clearly, when you work on the ground, you realize that is just not the case.
Exactly.
It doesn't get fixed like that.
Right.
And you need to think really deeply about the problem and the solution and bring everybody into the conversation. Otherwise, you're just going to run into brick walls.
Right.
So we're going to be talking about brick walls a little bit in the next segment and building new ones. But it's the built environment that is really critical.
Yeah,
and in those days, freeways were used to divide places,
Right.
not bring them together. So we see the freeway, we see roads built in Salinas that actually added to the separation of the LSL. And what you're trying to do right now, I understand, is to correct that.
Right.
Not just make for walkable spaces, but also make it easier by using different means of transportation systems to bring people from the LSL into the city itself, into the main street.
Absolutely. And ways to connect the LSL with the downtown, because it's right there on the edge of the downtown. And yet there are these physical barriers that make it challenging. So how can we remove some of those barriers to reconnect East Salinas with the rest of
and perhaps Salinas with the rest of the county.
Yeah.
Because I wonder how many of the children in the LSL have been to the beach recently.
Right. Right.
So we're going to pause in a moment and come back and talk a little bit about how this all works together. And so my name again is Carol McKibben. I'm the director of the Salinas History Project. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll come back and discuss with Megan Hunter, Cary and Siegfried, and Kirstan Lundquist their work in Salinas. Their good work. Thank you.